This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Why don't we just ask more questions about why? Why Jordan Love? Why Jalen Hurts? Why Disney World for NBA? Heck, why does Dr. Fauci even like baseball so much? There's a lot of whys to get into here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig, along with the one and only Ryan Rothstein on a Thursday. Ryan, what's going on with you?
I'm not Dr. Fauci, but we can still try and dissect sports and COVID-19, right? Maybe. Right. I don't know.
Well, listen, we got a lot to get into. You know, obviously there's still talk going on this week because everyone keeps trying to make an analogy between the Packers drafting Jordan Love and the Eagles drafting Jalen Hurts, which are completely two different situations, but what do we know? And then also our own Keith Smith, who comes on the Sports Bash every week, 2 weeks ago brought up the idea of Walt Disney World, and apparently now the NBA is taking the idea seriously. Read that what you will. And meanwhile, Dr. Fauci keeps insisting that we need to have baseball and that sports needs to come back, and it's important for the mental health of the country. So we got a lot of bullet points to get here too, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? It's interesting because Dr. Fauci has, and we're not going to do like a deep dive into that, like the medical aspect of it, but he said one thing, then another, and I'm not saying he's wrong. He's been unbelievable. He's been everyone's entire life since this pandemic really started. But about a month ago, he says, we're going to have sports in a few weeks. And then obviously information changes. And he says we can have sports without fans. And then recently he said, we might not have sports at all. And now he's saying, okay, well, we need to have it. It's good for your mental health, et cetera, et cetera. He's not wrong. It's just been a crazy time of so much unknown and uncertainty. And there's still going to be an unknown and uncertainty when these leagues have to make a decision. They're going to eventually have to make a decision on how and when and where they return to action.
Yeah, and I think that really the only reason why there's been confusion and uncertainty is because if you notice, when we have audio, like we have had on 97.3 ESPN, of the medical experts, whether it's Dr. Fauci or Dr. Tom Mayer, the NFLPA lead medical expert, who, for those who don't know, he worked in the Pentagon at 9/11, and he handled the anthrax pandemic. So people like this, like legitimate experts, when we play the audio of them, they're sitting out there saying we can have sports, we can play sports. But then you have people who are writing articles, basically interpolating what they're saying and converting it into something else. I think that's where some of the confusion happens, Ryan, which is people take quotes, build their own idea around it. But then when we play the actual audio, the guy sounds completely less dubious and clear.
Yeah, exactly. Because you have people, and this doesn't make any of these writers and reporters wrong, but they all have different agendas. They all have different, opinions on the situation. So and there is that level of unknown. So that's going to result in a lot of different viewpoints and answers, potential answers. And really it results in more questions. I think the biggest question is when the MLB or the NBA decides to go down to Orlando or resume play or whatever it may be, is society going to be ready to sprint out of their house and into a ballpark or an arena?
Well, I think that to me, the answer to that question has less to do with whether society wants to as much as it is, will they be allowed to, right? Like, they keep talking about there's different stages to this. There's different steps we have to take. For example, in Florida, the reason why there's allowed to be UFC fights in May is because they're doing it with no fans and they're just continuing their testing. So are people going to be okay with sports looking like that till further notice? We're telling people you could have sports on TV, but you're not going to be able to be at the game. So, Ryan, do you think people is that okay? Or is that just kind of like you have to concede to the reality?
This was a question and a conversation that we were having a lot in the early stages of the pandemic, and rightfully so. But I think we're at the point now, Josh, where all of this has become as close to normal for us as it can be. Like nothing has Nothing will phase us now at this point. I mean, if people out there are listening and you've left your house since this pandemic has started, everyone's wearing gloves, everyone is wearing masks, everyone is scared and being extra cautious, and that's become normal. And I think if the NBA, for example, announces that they're going to be back on TV next month or 2 weeks, whatever the date is, I think people are going to be excited. And then once it's back, then we're going to be able to have the conversations of, what'd you think of the game last night? Was that weird? How is this going to impact the sport? Like, those are the conversations I think we'll have once it starts. But I would assume the majority of people are going to be pumped that sports are back. Don't you think so?
Oh, they have to be, because number one, what else do we have going on? Like, I mean,
No.
and it's not a sports topic, but as you know, one of my non-sports things is different television shows and movies. And one of the concerns that happened because of the pandemic was there's a lot of movie production and television that got shut down because of the pandemic. And one of the concerns is, well, if we don't resume filming soon, we have broadcast schedules to keep up with. So how do different television shows wrap up their seasons when they didn't finish filming some of the scenes to finish those seasons? So to me, it's a similar question. Well, sports, they are going to resume eventually. So how do we resume eventually when it's not going to be on the same timetable as we previously hoped? And I think the answer to that, Ryan, you let me know what you think. Of course, people can text in at 609-403-0973. We will play a couple of the cuts from Dr. Fauci in just a bit. But I think the bigger question, to me at least, is we're going to be excited when it comes back, but are we going to accept that outcome when it comes back? For example, for a television show, are we going to accept the fact that they may have to, basically bend corners and, skip steps to wrap up seasons for, basically to have some sort of conclusion? Well, if basketball has a shortened playoff and the winner is, let's say, LeBron and the Lakers, are we just going to put a huge asterisk next to it and say, well, LeBron only won the championship with the Lakers because it was an NBA shortened season where there were 5-game series and a season actually ended on Labor Day?
Well, the LeBron haters are going to say that. I think we can say with confidence that the haters are going to continue to hate. But whether people realize this or not, Josh, people love to have those conversations. Like, yeah, if sports returns, there's going to be people out there saying, oh, yeah, well, LeBron won, but look at how he won. The season stopped for 2 months, and then they were in Orlando for best of fives, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter. Like, people miss those conversations. People miss well, I don't like this and you do. Let's debate it. So even though there may be some critics after the fact, I think everyone inside at the end of the day is going to be really excited sports are back.
And again, so if we could just let people know about part of what brought this conversation up was Shams Charania put out the tweet that one possible playing ground for the NBA to finish the season becomes safe for the league and the players, Walt Disney World property in Orlando, league sources tell The Athletic. The league has kept different scenarios in mind. Now, this specific scenario was put out weeks ago by Keith Smith from Yahoo Sports, who's been on the Sports Bash every week, about how Orlando has the complex, 12 on-site basketball courts, 2 of which are broadcast ready because of the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, enough hotel rooms to house every player, coach, official, television crew member, and more. They also have nearby medical facilities. They have everything on property that you would need to have basically an in-bubble environment. And not forget that Disney is the parent company of ESPN. And for the NBA, if they want to keep getting their billions of dollars from the television networks, it would only make sense to work with one of the people who are carrying your games.
I love the idea. I'm a big fan of it. But once again, I think the question is, if there's no vaccine, and I don't want to get into all the medical details and opinions because I don't know. But if there's no vaccine at the end of the day, even if they do as much as they can for preparation, there's still going to be a fear of this is going to come back. And the curve that everyone talks about, the levels in how much this is being spread, even if we minimize it and it stays minimized, don't you think that the NBA and the commissioner is going to be fearful of, even if we go down to Orlando and this comes back, then what? And how much worse of a situation are we in than we were in before?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. Number one, and not to get heavily onto the medical because we're not medical experts ourselves, but if you believe the medical experts, they're saying that if we go through these phases, if we go through this phases to get back to normalcy, that if there is a new return of new cases, that we'll be more prepared to deal with it. And I'll play that cut real quick. This is Dr. Fauci, an interview with Ryan Zimmerman. As I said again, Dr. Fauci apparently gets more out of these interviews with non-mainstream media types than when he talks to actual athletes like Ryan Zimmerman and Steph Curry. But this was his explanation about going through the phases to normalcy for baseball to resume.
As we start trying to get back to normality and pulling back on some of the strict mitigation, we have a 3-phase way to get back to normal. First, you get past the checkpoint, the gateway, kind of like the minor leagues before you get into the big leagues. Yep. Then you go to phase 1. And then if you do well, you go to phase 2 and then phase 3. If we do that successfully and there's no major outbreaks, I could foresee any of a number of scenarios.
And then he goes into all the scenarios, which we don't have to go into all of them, but obviously one being the option of players playing with no fans, option 2 of basically fans being there. But like Ryan, if you and your friend go to a game and you'll be 4 or 5 seats separated from another group of people watching the game. And then obviously the third option is if everything is perfect, then it'll be business as usual. But nobody thinks we're going to have business as usual. So basically only the first 2 options are in play.
Exactly. Like even when things open up and the sports world is back in action, it's not going to be normal, like you said. And there's still going to be a large part of society, Josh, that is going to be fearful and is going to remain in their house, that is going to still be wearing masks. And I'm sure that's probably still going to be mandated. Like if you leave the house or you're in a whatever, you're going to have to wear your mask.
And really quick, if I could jump in, one of the things to me that I don't think it gets talked about enough is that, do you really think that I'm going to be mad that if the only way we can play baseball, I have to go out in public wearing a mask? Like, is that really going to be the real big deterrent in my life?
Exactly. That's what I was attempting to communicate a couple minutes ago, is we're at the point now, like these conversations where I don't want to say this conversation now isn't legit, but the conversations early on were even more legitimate because there was so much unknown. We didn't know it would last this long. We thought sports would be back sooner, just maybe in a different type of capacity, such as the examples that we're listing right now. But at this point, Josh, like this way of living, this pandemic has been here for so long, it feels like, that we have adjusted as a society. I know people are struggling. There's a ton of issues in society and people personally, professionally, et cetera. But we've adjusted. It's been the only option, and this craziness has become normal. So if you're going to tell me, hey, guess what? We haven't had anything. Sports has been shut down. Your routine has been ruined and flipped on its head. We're going to put on baseball for you. We're going to put on NBA playoffs for you. Yeah, it's going to be different, but people are going to be so excited that it's back. I don't think it's going to matter. Listeners out there, if I'm wrong, text in 609-403-0973. I don't think I am.
Here's Dr. Fauci on basically what it's going to take to get back to normal, even when new cases happen in the future, specifically the question you were asking.
When we do get the reemergence of cases, which we will do, and whenever you pull back on mitigation, you have to expect that you're going to get cases that are going to be more than you had before. It's the ability and the efficiency with which you identify, isolate, contact trace, and get people out of circulation, protected with the medical care they need. If we do that well, we'll get back to normal sooner rather than later.
It sounds pretty straightforward to me. And I think that he basically is just telling us, look, there's a way to do this. My question still is, Ryan, are people going to accept that way of doing it? Because we know that every part of the country has different levels of this issue they're dealing with. Obviously, New York has been totally socked in the face, whereas Texas is way, way below the total of tests, per person right now. So, they're flattening the curve, and New York is still struggling. So Florida is saying that sports are essential, but in California, they're saying, hey, we ain't doing anything the rest of the year when it comes to, big events and sports and everything. So every part of the country is different, and I think that's something that gets overlooked in this.
Sure, but I think the only thing that comes into play there is like the state government versus the country government, right? But at the end of the day, when you throw the question out there, are people going to accept this? If the NBA is back and they're playing in an isolated location in Orlando in the worldwide of sports facilities, there's no option. You're either going to accept it or you're not going to watch. And any sports fan out there, after everything we've been through, if you watch sports even casually and they come back in a unique and different fashion, maybe not an ideal fashion, you're telling me as a sports fan, you're not going to accept it? What's your other option?
Exactly. And I think that I think we've gotten beyond if this is a good or bad idea, right? I think we're beyond the whole, Arizona's better than Florida option for baseball, or, I'd rather them go to Walt Disney World than Las Vegas for the NBA, or is the NHL going to North Dakota really a good idea? I think we're beyond that point. I think we finally, as of April 30th, it's taken us a month, but I feel like the world is finally coming to grips with the fact that, listen, reality is different. When we go out, if you go to the store, you're wearing a mask. They're saying that you can open up the parks this weekend here in New Jersey, right? Well, they're saying that they're going to be people monitoring how people go into the parks, that they're only supposed to be 55% capacity. So, Brian, you may want to go out this weekend to walk around a national park in South Jersey, one of the state parks. But if you show up at a certain time, they may tell you you're not allowed in.
Fine. I mean, who am I to moan and complain about that? The parks are open. Like, wait until people leave. Or you're assuming the possibility of not being allowed in. Like, we don't have an option. Like I said a minute ago, there is no option. You don't have a say in this. All right. You're not the president. You're not a state official. Maybe you are listening out there. All right. Maybe the governor's listening. I don't know. But you're most likely not. You most likely don't have a say. So guess what? Either stay in your house or have the potential to expand what you're able to do right now. And we haven't been able to do bleep. So be happy with what's coming. It's not going to be normal. It's not just going to be stop on a dime. Everything's back to normal how it was before the first day of the pandemic. That's not going to happen. It may not happen for a year, 2 years, who knows? But we're going to slowly progress back to normal, and people need to be positive and excited about those progressions.
Speaking of positive, this is Dr. Tom Mayer. He's the medical director for the NFL Players Association. He was a guest on the Adam Schefter podcast. This is what he had to say about the positives he is hearing.
Really, the juxtaposition of two what seem to be emerging facts. Number one, that the disease seems to be plateauing, both with regard to new cases per day, and in addition to that, that testing is available and could become widespread. I've talked to the CEOs and leadership teams of several of the testing companies, and those two things put together can begin to say, okay, I think I can begin to see a way that this could be done.
Again, that's the guy who's the medical director for the Players Association, the NFL Players Association. And this is a guy who worked at the Pentagon, and he handled the anthrax pandemic. So if he's saying there's positives, then there's no harm in being positive. It's just, I can't tell you what date it is, but it's coming.
And I think the negative, like the flip side of all of this, is we've heard so much and so many things are changing back and forth. A new step that we haven't heard before, and then take a step back, and then sports are coming in 2 weeks. Never mind, maybe they shouldn't. Sports are coming in 3 weeks with no fans. Never mind, maybe they shouldn't. So it's like, I think a lot of this has gotten to the point now, Josh, where people, it's like in one ear, out the other, and just like, let me know when something's on officially. Like, let me know when the NBA is playing a game. Just let me know when baseball is back, because all this talk now has been so back and forth and so unknown, and nothing has been confirmed or changed, that it's tough for people to like really rally and get behind these new ideas that, come to the surface.
And as we know, next month, the NFL is going to release their schedule for the season. And part of that schedule are contingency plans for full 16-game, 14-game, 12-game, starting the season a month late and going all the way into February. Well, Dr. Tom Mayer talked about someone went into impacting basically the NFL's projected windows for all of those scenarios. This is Dr. Tom Mayer again.
Again, it's a juxtaposition of what is the virus doing in those hot spots, And that seems to be declining even in the hottest of the hot spots, or at least plateauing. I shouldn't say declining yet. The last couple of days showed some declines, but let's knock on wood and hope that decline continues. Second piece then is the testing itself. And I'm going to tell you that we've said all along, this is a 4-month run. We're about 2 months and 2 to 3 weeks into that run.
So the NFL, just for those who don't know, the NFL originally had a 4-month window starting at the beginning of April, Ryan, that they said that we're not having OTAs, mini camps, training camps, nothing. The we're planning is it might take us 4 months to ever get a guy back into a facility. And that's what he saw about this. So the NFL apparently is planning everything around this possibility that if we need to just not show up at the facility for 4 months, from April to 4 months from the beginning of April, which would be April, May, June, July, basically the summer, then they're ready for it.
Well, what do you mean? If they're saying that teams can't go back to the facility, then how do they adjust?
Well, for example, right now they're doing the virtual meetings, they're doing the virtual workouts in the off season until they're allowed to go back to the facilities. And the NFL feels like there should be a 4-month window planning, as if from the beginning of April, then 4 months, saying that basically we're not going to have people in the building to work out and train, but if we can get back earlier, we can. But we're planning as if it's going to take a certain amount of time in case, basically they're preparing for the worst case scenario instead of the best case scenarios.
Here's the thing. So was it announced that May 1st, depending on the state you're in, you can return to the facility, correct, for the NBA? Okay,
so what the NBA came out with, they adjusted this the other day, which is May 8th is going to be a target date that if they're going to discuss about the possibility of people returning to the facilities. I know May 1st, Adam Silver and his team are sitting down and saying we're going to reevaluate our timetable. May 8th is the current projected. People can go back for like individual workouts and training at facilities. And the working theory, because the NHL is saying they plan to return from their isolation after May 15th, that apparently there's the theory that the NHL and the NBA are on similar timetables.
Okay, great. And my point with that is, if you're an owner of an NBA franchise, Josh Hennig, and the commissioner and whatever, the country says, okay, if you're in states X, Y, and Z, you can do A, B, and C. So if you're in Oklahoma, you can go to your practice facility, whatever it is. But if you're in New York and Philly, you can't. So if you're an owner of a team, you posed the question earlier, are people going to accept it? I think the bigger question is, are people that hold a high position within these sports leagues, are they willing to accept it? Because you have the Sixers maybe returning to their facility next week. That's just an example. And then you have the Lakers not able to return to their facility to July or not return at all. And then you kind of have an unfair advantage within teams within your league. So those are the decisions that the commissioner and individual owners have to make. Do you think all of the owners can accept that and just get on board for the greater good of the league and society?
That's a great question. We'll answer that coming up next. 609-403-0970. Good to be your text messages. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here on the warm-up. 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here, hanging out with you. 609-403-0973. We've been talking a bunch about what sports will be like and what it would be like when we return. Will it matter? Or have we finally resigned ourselves to this reality? And Ryan, you asked the question about, will the owners accept that as well? Will the teams themselves accept that everyone's situation is different?
Yeah, so you asked the question in the early parts of the show, are people and fans going to accept these leagues that could be potentially coming back on weird terms, on no fans or in one location, whatever it may be? So, I mean, I want to throw out there the individual owners. If you're in a state that says, okay, this state can go to your practice facility, but your state can't, and now you have less resources than your competition, are you going to forget the greater good of society and the greater good of potentially your league and say, no, we can't do this? Or are you going to take a back seat and say whatever we need to do to get basketball back on the televisions and back in season? I think that that's a really interesting aspect of all of this.
And I think part of what should be factored in is that, and I'm not trying to go too hard into a history lesson, but remember it was about 10 years ago that half the league was barely making their budget. The NBA, about almost 10 years ago, they were making billions of dollars gross, but they were not netting anywhere close to those billions. That the teams around the league were all financially struggling, and it took the lockout, and it took the changes that happened from the 2011 lockout to force a lot of the league to become financially profitable for everybody. So you have to wonder, are some of these owners going to sacrifice their own maybe best interests for the sake of making sure they keep making money and they don't fall back into the hole that they were financially before?
Yeah, that's a good point. That could be the bottom line point in all of this, where I said to your question, my answer was, I don't think fans really have a choice. It's either be in a better situation than we are now currently or remain in the situation. I think it's fair to suggest that that also applies to the owners.
It has to, because listen, there's nobody who's really escaping the impact of this. It's not like, there's one specific person who's making good in all this, except for like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. But aside from that, there's nobody's really making out. People are struggling. People are suffering. And listen, those owners don't want to lose everything that they've earned and made. And listen, if it means they have to make sacrifices too, I'm sure that some of them are willing to bite the bullet like the rest of us, because if that means they don't lose, their cash cow, then it's open for them.
Exactly. They're businessmen. So I could see some owners fighting a certain option and saying, well, what are our other options? Do we have to do this? Because option A is really going to impact my organization. It's still going to be a better situation than we're in now, but there's other options that can maybe equal the playing field. Maybe they say revenue is, given out equally when we return due to the unusual circumstances. Like, who knows what the compromise could be, but those are the conversations that I assume the commissioners and the owners have to be already having.
Absolutely. 609-403-0973. We did promise we get to some text here on the text board. 609-403-0973. Tom from the Villa says, I'd say if basketball comes back, watch out for the Nets if Durant is ready to come back. Now, that's an interesting question, because we know that there's a lot of players who were injured when the NBA went on hiatus, Ryan. And how many of those guys would be ready to come back? We expect, for example, Ben Simmons to be healthy and ready. If the NBA resumes in July, which is basically what most people believe would happen, if the leagues do resume, would take until July, that, okay, Ben Simmons is back, is healthy. Is Durant wanting to come back and ready to go? Are teams, maybe like the Warriors, Steve Kerr said that they're basically mentally planning as if their season's over. Well, do a team like the Warriors say, we really don't care if we have to go back out and play 2 more games in like some warm-up situation for the playoff teams, because our season's already over, so let's just sit Steph Curry? Or do the Nets go the opposite direction and say, hey, Durant wants to go out there and play, let's let him play?
Don't you think, and this is obviously a complete assumption here from me, as most things are, but if you're Steph Curry, I mean, he's been interviewing people on his social media. All these athletes are trying to get good PR out of this, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, but they're really trying to help and show their other side of they're not just athletes and it's bigger than basketball or football, whatever the sport may be. I would assume, Josh, that if basketball says we're coming back, Steph Curry's going to want to play. Like, he's going to want to be a part of helping the world and this country and the society get back to normal. I don't think anyone's going to sit out. I mean, Steve Kerr's the head coach of that team. He's very understanding and wants to help. I see all these athletes, regardless of team success, willing to come back and play.
609-403-0973 is text for Nick from Brigantine says, I want sports back so bad. I don't care if they play pig and basketball 6 feet apart.
Well, they tried that. It didn't work very well.
Yeah, that whole horse competition was such a mess.
Yeah, that was brutal. But I get what he's saying. That's what we were trying to say earlier, is that I think sports fans are at the point now that they're going to be just pumped and fired up to have sports back on TV, regardless of how different it is.
609-403-0973. Dan from EHC brings up a serious point and then a funny point. He says, state to state is like another country now. We are not united at all. The United States isn't it when it comes to this situation. He's right. You know, we've been talking about how, listen, you may be able to go back to your facility in Atlanta, but you might not be able to go back in Philadelphia. So maybe that's where, Ryan, the Disney World concept becomes more of an accelerated idea, which is, can we just ship everybody to Florida, because Florida say sports are essential, and just have everybody go to Florida and everybody just go train and prepare for the resume the season for a month down there to even avoid some of this?
Yeah, and who cares? It's Florida anyway, so send everyone down to Florida. Let's just see what happens. But
Dan from EHC also brings up more of a funny point. He says, I've overheard rumors that Ben Simmons is practicing his layups and dunks. I wonder if Dr. Fauci come up with a drug treatment for Ben Simmons to take jump shots in the game.
Come on, Dan. Why are you doing some low blows there at our guy Ben? Listen, Ben, I follow him on Instagram. I don't think he follows me back. Maybe I'll get there one day. I saw on his Instagram he was hanging out in South Jersey doing some fishing. So maybe that's the the mental escape Ben needed to start swishing some threes.
Also, we have a great text, and the person didn't leave their name, but I want to say thank you to them, because the texter says, I'm a police officer with the New Jersey State Park Police. So first of all, sir, thank you for what you're doing in the world right now, because obviously, anyone who has to go out and go to work in a public environment is, putting themselves in some level of danger on any level. So thank you, sir. He says, we have no orders to count park patrons entering the parks right now, just to make sure people are still practicing social distancing. So they're not counting. Their job is to basically to monitor people. Parks will be open for hiking, biking, running, and walking, but will be closed for picnicking, playgrounds, exercise stations, pavilions, restrooms. Buildings will still remain closed. Be safe, everyone. So there's some clarity about what's going to happen this Saturday for you.
Very cool for that police officer to chime in. And like Josh said, thank you for all that you're doing right now. And that makes sense because, like, even in my area, by Atlantic City, Ventnor, Margate, Longport, that area, beaches are closed, boardwalk is closed, but they're not like they don't have bouncers at the entrance of the beach and the boardwalk.
Maybe there should be.
Maybe there should be.
There's a way to get people back some jobs. Let's just hire a bunch of people to work as bouncers and security people for public locations.
Yeah, they put a little like red velvet like
Something.
rope up. Yeah, like it's a nightclub. You have to wait to get onto the beach, but they're just making sure that people aren't in large groups and that it's not dangerous. It's regulated, but it's not like you're in jail, so to speak, although some people probably feel like it right now. So we'll see what happens.
Again, people can keep texting in 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. Again, part of what sparked this conversation was the NBA now is seriously considering the Walt Disney World idea that Keith Smith, who's been on the Sports Bash every week throughout the last couple of years on 97.3 ESPN of Yahoo Sports, but out there, he's a former Disney employee, Ryan. So basically the idea is that everybody would go to Disney World. There's your biosphere for basketball. And because they have all the courts and all the facilities, they could do this. And I think that's what the bigger solution is. And that is, let's get everybody to one location so we can confine them, test them, make sure everything's good to go, and maybe not even worry about these facilities. Who cares if, the Hawks can practice and the Sixers can't? Instead of even going through that problem, why don't we just ship everybody to Florida?
I have a question.
I might have an answer.
I hope so. That's usually how it works here on our show. What can these leagues do right now? What are they capable of doing? And I'm not being a smartass. What are they able to do? Can the NBA start back up in Disney World in Orlando tomorrow?
So,
go ahead.
So I was going to say, so for example, in Florida, there's two things we know specifically with Florida right now. One is they say sports are essential, and they have basically made it an opening for example, WWE to keep doing their live shows, Raw, NXT, SmackDown. WWE is going through with their pay-per-view in 2 weeks. So Florida has been a major catalyst in them being able to keep doing that. The other part of it is the UFC is going to Florida. They're going to have 3 fight cards next month. No fans in the arena, but they're still going to have the fights. So we know that Florida has basically laid out a situation where they are, for lack of a better term, putting the parameters in so these sports can perform in that state.
Got you. So the answer is yes. If Adam Silver and the NBA wanted to go down to Disney, the worldwide of sports facility, and start playing games, as long as they figured out the logistics of where to put teams, et cetera, practice, they can do it.
Correct.
So it just comes to the point of, if you're Adam Silver, do you want to try and wait for things to get better? Do you want to just say, screw it, and say, we're going down to Disney right now? Or option C? And I think if you're the commissioner, Josh, like, how do you weigh out those options? How do you say it's my time to make a decision and be proactive, or I'm not doing any of that and I'm kind of waiting this out until I get a green light?
Well, the other thing is you asked about the owners. Well,
Yeah.
we know the owners have to agree with the Players Association about anything that happens, right? Well, LeBron James and other athletes have all come out, and there's this consensus agreement that it's going to take a ramp up, no matter what the answer is, for them to get back into basketball shape. That a lot of these guys don't have basketball courts accessible. They're only doing their regular at-home workouts. So if it's going to take X number of weeks for a warm-up period, and then you want to have maybe like a round robin of games to get ready. Remember back in when the lockout happened in 98, 99, that they had basically a couple of weeks of basically exhibition games. And then, all right, full throttle start February 1st week. Maybe that's what we're looking at, Ryan. Maybe it's something where even when they get down there, they have X number of weeks they have to basically go through a training camp, whether it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then another 2-3 weeks of just warm-up games. And then, boom, we start, end of June, beginning of July down in Florida, and maybe that's just how it works.
Why not do that now? Like, if you're the NBA, why not say, okay, Florida, we have free reign to go down there and play ball. We need all these teams and players to warm up and get back in game shape and have practices, whatever it may be. We're shipping everyone down to Florida, and we're going to let them practice for 2 weeks. And then May 15th, we'll see where we're at. And then possibly the next 2 weeks, starting May 15th, we're going to have 10 days of exhibition games that will be televised on ESPN. They don't count towards the regular season, but we're going to get these guys back in shape. We're going to give the society and the world what they want with sports. And then after that point, when they're all ready to play ball, it's going to be a month later, and then they can kind of see where they're at. I think that could be an interesting option.
Yeah, and I think that's where the logistics come in for Disney World, especially because of the fact that you just got to get everyone there first, obviously logistically, because everyone's spread all over the country right now. But obviously they can figure that out. I don't think that's going to be the most ridiculous thing to figure out.
No.
They want to make sure they test everybody, so you're going to have to work through the logistics of that. And then once you get everybody there and everything's in place for them to do it, I don't know how many weeks that'll take, because, again, Adam Silver said previously that May 1st, which is tomorrow, they're going to start talking about timetables again. And then the NHL came out and said that their current plan is after May 15th to start using the facilities again, at least in a limited capacity. So if you have a situation where you have at least a timeline and a structure in place, then at least you can follow that, but it might not be as quickly as we may hope, because, again, there's certain things you have to work around. For example, how are you getting people out of California?
Yeah, minor detail. I heard that state's pretty big. Right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
That's my bad joke. That's all I had. But it's like California, right? How about the size of
California?
that? It's just a matter. Like, I wish we knew exactly where these leagues are at right now in this process, and maybe they don't know, and that's part of the problem and the unknown. So I don't know. I just hope we get some type of answer and some type of good news. We've debated a lot in the past 40 minutes or so. Are people going to like this idea? Are people going to like that idea? The bottom line, I think, that you and I both came to, is people are going to be excited, and it's going to be a good for society that something is back to normal and sports return at any capacity.
Absolutely. And Mike Gill sent me the note from LeBron James saying that, basically he believes that nobody is saying anything about canceling the season, that LeBron is saying that as soon as it's safe, we would like to finish our season. I'm ready and our team is ready. Nobody should be canceling anything. That's from LeBron James. So April 30th, LeBron's put down the gauntlet, Ryan.
Yeah, well, LeBron's in season 89, so he wants to finish this year. His team's in first place, and he has a shot at the Larry O'Brien, so I don't blame him.
Text board is open. 609-403-0973 is text board. By the way, I want to let people know that tomorrow on the warm-up, we'll have Ben Golliver, national NBA writer for the Washington Post, talk about the Jordan documentary and some basketball with him, so we could pick his brain a little bit more about this whole NBA going to Disney plan as well. Plus, coming up on the Sports Bash, talking more about the NHL's plans for resuming. Kevin Durso, 97.3 ESPN.com Flyers insider, joins Mike Gill at 3 o'clock and talk more about baseball and their situation. Bob Nightingale joins Mike Gill coming up at 4:30. So we got you covered today and tomorrow here on 97.3 ESPN. All the details you need right here. 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. We'll get back to text in just a minute, 609-403-0973. But Ryan, following up what we said earlier about these are businessmen who run these teams. These are businessmen themselves as athletes who are trying to make sure they keep making money. You just stumbled across some projections about the money that could be lost by some of these sports.
Yeah, so this basically brings our entire conversation the past hour full circle, Josh. And a study was done where the research found that the sports industry in the world, not just in the United States,
Correct,
could lose as much as US dollars 62 billion in missed revenue by the time the 2020 calendar year comes to an end. That's 62 with a B billion dollars in missed revenue, with close to half of the sporting calendar at risk of being shelved due to the pandemic from COVID-19. A report by the sports marketing agency Two Circles estimates that the industry will now only generate 73 billion this year in revenue. According to the study, the sports industry was originally on pace to hit 136 billion in total income, which would have been a 5% increase from last year's 128 billion in 2019. And just to wrap this up, however, with leagues and federations scrambling to mitigate the damage following the suspension of nearly all sporting events in mid-March, it is estimated that only 50%, 53 to be exact, of scheduled events will be taking place in 2020. So out of all of the scheduled sporting events that were supposed to go on this year, only 53% of those events will actually take place. So staggering numbers. And as time goes on, the sports world will only continue to leak more and more straight cash. But the last part of this, a direct quote: sports properties are keen to return as soon as possible, as the longer the sports calendar is on hiatus, the worse the financial impact will be, said the CEO of the company that did this study. However, sports should and will only return when it is deemed safe to do so and with full support of all relevant government and medical authorities.
And just to add to that, two things. One, you mentioned that 53%. Remember, a huge chunk of that sports that will not happen this year is because the Olympics were pushed to next summer. So there's a huge gap on the sports calendar, on the programming calendar, for example, for NBC, with no Olympics, this summer. So you know that if they can get, for example, the PGA Tour is talking returning this summer. We know that NBA, NHL could be back. We could see a lot of NHL games on NBC regular, Ryan, because they got content hours to fill. So, for example, part of that huge gap in the calendar is no Olympics. And if all these sports are going to find a way to resume this summer, then that's where the fill of some of that, television content is going to be.
That's a really great point by Josh Hennig to add the Olympics, because in this article, it doesn't even mention that. And that is a huge factor that only makes this more of a perfect storm, so to speak, in the hurdles that the sports world faces.
And then the other point is the last quote you had about it's the support of all relevant government and medical authorities. Well, as we mentioned earlier throughout the show, the NBA is seriously considering the Walt Disney World idea. Well, Disney World is located in Florida, and the governor in Florida is supporting them doing sports in his state. The UFC's already going to have 3 events there next month. Orlando's all set up. So it seems to me more and more that it's only going to make sense for when the NBA returns, for when baseball returns. You know, the Arizona governor says he's behind an idea as well to have an isolated bubble biosphere in Arizona. So listen, if these state governments are behind it, and if these owners can salvage their money, at least from the TV contracts, and the TV networks can salvage their agreements for content and programming and advertisers, at least the loss of revenue is stymied a little bit, and the rest of us get some sort of sports back.
Exactly. So it's staggering numbers. It's scary when you see it in writing. And as time goes on, it seems like that all these sports leagues have become more and more proactive, not that they never weren't, but more proactive in trying to figure out some type of solution to not only get some money back business-wise, but just for the mental health of our country's society as a whole.
And then one more logistical question that I just want to throw out there, not much of a question, but an idea, and that is, I wonder, Ryan, because of the way the NFL draft went, because of how virtual it was, how many of these events, UFC fights, NBA games, baseball games, how many of those events will actually have the broadcasters actually on site? Could we maybe just have cameras on site and the broadcasters in a remote broadcast area, maybe like in Bristol, Connecticut or somewhere else?
That's a great question. I think we got to try and squeeze that into an already busy show planned for Friday tomorrow. And it's, listen, how does it impact the sports world as a whole as far as TV? Because the NFL draft, as you said, had a ton of success, all virtual. Is that going to shift and impact how things are viewed down the road? I think it might.
Absolutely. Ryan, your Twitter is?
Ryan973 ESPN.
I am at Josh Hennig. Hennig spelled Hennig.